There was a place, once, on nearly every corner of American life, where a teenager could disappear from the watchful eyes of adults without actually going anywhere dangerous at all. A booth in the back of a malt shop. A parking lot outside a roller rink. The hood of a car parked sideways across 3 spaces at the edge of a drive-in movie screen. These were not extraordinary places. They were ordinary, unremarkable, almost invisible to the grown-up world. And that invisibility was the entire point. Somewhere between the 1950s and today, those places quietly closed their doors, and an entire way of growing up went with them. This is the story of where the teenagers went, and why they never really came back. To understand what disappeared, you first have to understand what existed. For most of the 20th century, American teenagers occupied something sociologists would later call a third place. Not home, which belonged to parents. Not school, which belonged to teachers. But a third space, carved out just for them, usually within walking or biking distance, usually cheap enough to visit on an allowance, and almost always built around some small transaction that gave a kid a reason to be there. A 5-cent phosphate. A quarter for the jukebox. A dime for a game of pinball. The transaction was almost beside the point. What you were really buying was permission to exist in public, unsupervised, among your peers. The drugstore soda fountain was the original version of this. Long before shopping malls, the corner drugstore was where a teenager could sit at a counter, order a cherry Coke, and watch the world go by for the price of a nickel. When the soda fountain faded in the 60s and 70s, its social function didn't disappear, it just moved. It moved to the diner, with its endless coffee refills and its willingness to let a group of kids occupy a booth for 2 hours over a single plate of fries. It moved to the drive-in restaurant, where you never even had to get out of the car, where a car hop on roller skates brought the food to you and the parking lot itself became the hangout. And when drive-ins gave way to fast food chains in the 70s and 80s, something changed that people didn't notice right away. The new restaurants were built for turnover, not for lingering. The booths were smaller. The lighting was brighter. Nobody wanted you to stay. That shift, the quiet redesign of public space to discourage lingering, turns out to be one of the biggest reasons teen hangouts vanished, and almost nobody talks about it that way. Business owners, especially as commercial rents rose through the 80s and 90s, needed customers to buy, eat, and leave. A group of teenagers nursing one milkshake for 3 hours was, from a purely economic standpoint, a liability. Restaurants began designing their spaces around speed. Malls began installing curfew policies for unaccompanied minors. Convenience stores put up signs limiting how many teenagers could be inside at once. None of this happened through some grand conspiracy. It happened restaurant by restaurant, store by store, each one making a reasonable business decision that, added up across the entire country, closed off nearly every free or cheap place where teenagers used to gather. The shopping mall deserves its own moment in this story, because for a while, in the 70s and 80s, the mall was the closest thing America had to a replacement for the old drugstore counter or the drive-in lot. It was climate-controlled, it was safe, it had a food court, and critically, it had an arcade. Kids could ride bikes or get dropped off, spend an afternoon wandering with friends, feed quarters into Pac-Man or Galaga, and go home having spent almost nothing and seen almost everybody they knew. Mall management even had a name for teenagers who did this, mall rats, said with a mix of affection and irritation. But by the 2000s, as online shopping began hollowing out the retail industry, malls started closing at a staggering rate, and the ones that survived often did so by tightening their rules, adding parental escort policies for anyone under 18 after certain hours, precisely because the very kids who had once been the mall's most loyal customers were now seen as bad for business. The arcades inside those malls closed even faster than the malls themselves, killed off first by home video game consoles and later by smartphones, which put a nearly infinite arcade in every kid's pocket and removed any reason to leave the house at all. That, in the end, might be the deepest reason of all. The hangouts didn't just close because businesses stopped wanting teenagers around. They closed because, over time, teenagers stopped needing them in the same way. A hangout only exists because there's something you can't get any other way, mainly, the company of other kids your age, away from your parents. But starting in the 90s and accelerating hard through the 2000s and into the smartphone era, that company became available anywhere, anytime, without ever leaving your bedroom. A phone call, then instant messaging, then texting, then social media, then group chats and video calls. Each new technology chipped away a little more at the reason to physically travel somewhere and be present in a shared space. Why bike across town to the roller rink to see if your friends were there, when you already knew exactly where they were and what they were doing, because they had already posted about it? There's also a less obvious culprit here, and it has to do with how American parents began to see the outside world. Through the 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s, it was completely normal for a 12 or 13-year-old to leave the house after breakfast and not be seen again until dinner, with no one particularly worried about where they'd gone. That kind of unsupervised freedom, sometimes called free-range childhood, was the entire engine that powered the old hangout culture. You couldn't have a roller rink full of unaccompanied teenagers without a culture that trusted teenagers to be unaccompanied. But starting in the 80s, fueled by heavily publicized, though statistically rare, cases of child abduction, and later reinforced by 24-hour cable news, American parenting shifted dramatically towards supervision and structure. Free time got scheduled. Afternoons that used to belong to bike rides and drugstore counters got filled instead with organized sports, tutoring, and adult-supervised activities. The unsupervised third place, by definition, cannot survive in a culture that no longer believes in unsupervised time. Cars played their own quiet role in all of this too. For decades, getting a driver's license at 16 was practically a rite of passage, and it was the key that unlocked every hangout on this list, because most of them depended on a teenager's ability to get somewhere without a parent behind the wheel. But licensing rates among American teenagers have been falling for years now, a trend that predates smartphones and has continued alongside them. Rising insurance costs, stricter graduated licensing laws passed in the 90s and 2000s specifically to keep young drivers off the road at night, and simply less urgency to drive when your social life exists on a screen, all combined to keep teenagers off the streets and, by extension, out of the parking lots and drive-in lots that used to be full of them. Put all of these threads together and a pattern starts to emerge. It wasn't one single villain that ended the era of the teen hangout. It was a slow convergence of forces, each one reasonable on its own, each one small enough to go unnoticed at the time. Retail economics pushed lingering customers out the door. Suburban sprawl and stricter driving laws made it harder to get anywhere without a parent's help. A culture of supervision replaced a culture of unsupervised freedom. And technology, arriving in wave after wave, from the telephone to the smartphone, gradually removed the actual need to leave the house at all. None of these forces set out to destroy the roller rink or the drive-in or the mall arcade. They just made those places, one quiet decision at a time, unnecessary. What's left behind is something oddly invisible. Drive the same roads that used to be lined with drive-in restaurants and roller rinks, and you'll mostly find drugstores with drive-through pharmacy windows, empty big-box stores, or parking lots that never fill up anymore. The buildings are gone or repurposed, and so, in a way, is the specific kind of freedom they used to offer, the freedom to be a teenager in public, unsupervised, spending almost nothing, with nowhere in particular to be. It's easy to romanticize that world, and easy to forget its problems. But it's hard to deny that something real disappeared along with it, a whole geography of growing up that an entire generation once took completely for granted, right up until the day it simply wasn't there anymore.